And then this one is, yeah, it's more common. You've probably seen this one more often. It's the same idea, though. You notice, again, it's a subtle attack on religious people, isn't it? To say, you're the ones that are causing all the problems. If you just coexist, it'd be a wonderful world. That's what John Lennon said. Remember, Imagine? Oh, it was a nice song, but when you look at the lyrics, it's pretty chilling. It's a world without God, a world without religion, and we'll have peace on earth. It'll be wonderful.
Yeah.
All right. Well, let me tell you some stories about this so-called tolerance that people are pushing these days. A first grader in Florida began talking to a classmate at recess about their mutual faith in Jesus. At recess is the key thing. A teacher overheard the conversation and reprimanded them for talking about Jesus at school. That doesn't sound tolerant. A fourth grader bowed his head at a different school lunchtime to whisper a silent prayer. He ended up having to go to the principal's office. I'm getting these from a Josh McDowell book. I'll tell you more about that in a while. In New York, a third grade teacher stopped a child from reading the Bible in her free time. The crying child was told, "Don't bring that book again."
Forbidden book.
A forbidden book. This one I took from the San Diego Union Tribune. I was just looking through one day and I came across this letter to the editor. For nearly 20 years, I kept a 12-inch Christmas tree on my desk. It was adorned only with small frog ornaments. Nothing about Jesus, nothing about a manger, nothing about wise men. My principal told me to remove it because it had offended a student and her mother. When I protested, he said, "Why would you keep it if it offends even a single child or parent?" I made my decision for early retirement that day. And I'm thinking, oh, I hate to lose this person, but this person's saying it's not worth it and is walking away from the job because of this attitude and this approach. So at one time, this is the tolerance I grew up with, and I bet most of you grew up with. We knew that some things were right or wrong, and that if you used truth, if you could figure out the truth, you could then talk to people and try to figure out where the truth was. So you would argue. It was okay to argue. You would say, well, you believe X, I believe Y. Let's figure out what the truth is. I think truth's on my side. I don't think your truth works. And people were respecting beliefs and practices that they didn't agree with. They wouldn't call people names if they didn't agree with them. But you always thought, if we just talk it out, we'll get to the truth. It was pretty optimistic. The Bible shares that earlier belief, doesn't it, of tolerance. Colossians 3, what does it say? Bear with each other. It doesn't say you have to love everything about everybody, but you bear with them. Ephesians, same thing, bearing with one another. In 1 Peter, show respect to everyone. It doesn't say just Christians or just non-Christians, everybody. And of course, the key verse for apologetics is 1 Peter 3:15. Give an answer to everybody, but he says do it with gentleness and respect. So we're hearing that over and over again. Tolerate people, get along with people, bear with each other. We're not all going to agree. We're going to bump heads once in a while. But what's going on now? Well, we've got this thing called postmodernism. I think it's actually dying on the vine, but it's taken a long time. It's infected all of society, unfortunately. We had modernism. Modernism said there is truth, and we can find it out. It kind of stepped away from God. It said, well, let's not talk about religious truth. Let's use science, and we're going to make this a wonderful world. We can use our rational mind. Well, people got kind of burned out on that thanks to World War I and World War II. So much for modernity. It didn't seem to pan out very well. We were doing terrible things, dropping atomic bombs. That was science. That didn't turn out so well. We had all the 1950s movies that I grew up on that scared me to death with all the giant locusts and remember all the radiated monsters that would come along? Yes. Them, things like that. I was like, oh, wait a minute, maybe science is not the way to go. And so you get this thing called post, meaning after modernism, which basically gives up on the idea of truth. New definition, every view is okay. It's just as true as any other belief. So you got to value them. If there's no right and there's no wrong, you got to be nice to everybody. You got to say, well, good for you. Okay, that makes as much sense as that other person. You can't call anything immoral, because that means you got some kind of standard out. There's no standard. It's just everybody's got his or her own truth. Every religious teaching is seen as equal. And of course, what stands in the way of this new view is Christianity. Right? That new view comes along and all of a sudden we take a stand there. We say, wait a minute. We don't think God is any mushy way that you want to think about him. We think there is a God and he has certain characteristics, and here they are. It just kills me when I hear people say Allah and God, the Christian God. What's the difference? Yeah, about this much? Huge. It's not the same God. It's a different God, but that's from our Christian perspective. So can you see from a postmodern view, it's like, come on, you guys are saying there is a specific truth. We think there's such a thing as sin. That's not very popular anymore. We say there's a standard, that's God's standards, and we don't match up. We fall short. That's what Paul says. That's not popular. That's not what the postmodern view wants. They want to get past that. Jesus said he is the truth, in fact. There's one way to God. That's him. And we're supposed to go preach this. We're not supposed to just internalize it and privatize it. That's what they would like us to do, to just shut up and go home and enjoy Jesus in our house and not spread it out in the public. So that's why especially Christians are right in the crosshairs of this situation, because we take such a different view of truth and who Jesus is and what God is. So what are some of the implications of this new kind of tolerance? What I just said before. It's fine for you to have your faith, don't share it. It's perfectly okay. We're all happy because you got your Christianity, somebody else got Buddhism. Just shut up about it. Go home and be that, but don't share it. Don't get it out in public. Certainly don't talk about it as if you're a candidate or something for a public office. That's a kiss of death these days. So you're supposed to privatize it. Your faith is fine, but it's just your faith. Keep it home. Have you noticed dominance of feelings these days? People even start their sentences, well, I feel. Nobody says, I think. It's a lot of fuzzy emotional feelings that are out there. Just look at movies these days. It's follow your heart. How many times do you hear that? Society will mislead you. Follow your heart. That's not what Jeremiah says. The heart is a really wicked, ugly thing. And religious persecution. If you stake out a position, like we just said with Christianity, they're coming after you.
The Oregon bakery.
Yes, I always think of those bakery situations. So let's think about some responses that we might have if we're out in the community and we stake out one of those Christian positions. You may hear something like this: oh, you're intolerant, you're homophobic, you're arrogant, you're narrow-minded, judgmental, whatever the word is. Do you have any responses immediately to things like that? The first thing we probably are going to want to say is, no, I'm not, and then give them 20 reasons why we're not. Well, yeah, you can do that, but you can deflate this much faster than having to spend 20 minutes explaining why you're not homophobic.
I would want them to tolerate me.
Oh, yeah, what happened to tolerance is a two-way
Those
street
two
here.
words. Mhm.
Yeah, that's good. Rick?
Well, I came up with a word what I would use is Christophobic. So for me, if I'm homophobic, you're Christophobic. You fear Christ, you fear Christians, and Christ's message. So that's Christophobic.
Christophobic, okay.
So that's what I would throw back at. You're Christophobic, here's the definition.
See, what Rick's going for is, that's called a self-defeating argument, isn't it? What are they doing? They're shooting themselves in the foot without realizing. When they turn around and say you're intolerant, what did they just do? They exclude you from something so that they don't tolerate you. If they tolerate you, they say, well, you have a different view than I do, but oh, good for you. They don't say that. They say, and they point and they got the finger going. You know, you're intolerant, you're narrow-minded, you think there's something wrong and right, but so do they. You're judgmental. That's a judgment. And then one of the things that you could do too at the bottom here, I just gave you some other things you might say as a response, but how about this? Maybe I am those things. But so what? That doesn't make my argument false. So you come out and you say, you know, it's really pretty bad for kids to grow up in a homosexual relationship. It's better for them to have a mom and dad and married. And instead of them saying, well, where'd you get that? That's interesting. Have they done some studies? And you say, yes, they have. They're not going to go that route. They're going to say those terms. You're homophobic, you're this, you're that. And you can simply say, my argument is still there. Go ahead and put a label on me if you want to, but that doesn't defeat the argument. Do you see what's going on? It's called an ad hominem. That's the fancy Latin phrase. That's attacking somebody personally as a way to avoid the argument. You're just slapping a label and saying, okay, I'm done with you. Yeah, but you didn't hear what I had to say. It doesn't matter. I consider you, you know, whatever, and there I'll write the name. There you go. You got your label there. How about a challenge like this? What would you say if somebody, let's take these three quotes up here. Somebody says to you, hey, you shouldn't be spreading your faith by talking to others. Leave people alone to find their own values. How about this? Jesus was tolerant. You don't sound very tolerant. Jesus was tolerant. We're not supposed to judge. That's in Matthew. That's the only verse they know. But they know that verse. Judge not, lest you be judged. So do we have any responses to any of those?
Yeah, what's the rest of the chapter say?
Yeah, that's right. Have you actually read the book?
Jesus is pretty judgmental. He talked a lot about judgment. Steve talked about that. He said Jesus talks more about hell than anybody else.
What do you say about the Pharisees and the Sadducees?
Yeah, you whitewash tombs.
Yeah.
Oh my, that sounds kind of intolerant there, doesn't it? And Paul was intolerant, so was Peter. I mean, you go down the list. They were intolerant. They didn't take everybody and say, well, good for you. You just have a different perspective. How about leave people alone to find their own values? What are they doing? Are they leaving you alone? There we go again. That's one of those self-inflicted arguments that they're doing there. How about this? I love this response. One time somebody called up Greg Kokel. I don't know if I've shared this with the class before, but I thought it was so good. This person said, I'm in a tough situation. I'm at a job where there's somebody who's super, super, super liberal, and I know it was some kind of homosexuality thing that was coming up. I know that person's going to ask me, what are your feelings about homosexuality? And I know it's not going to be a fair deal. Once they find out, they're going to, blow me out of the water. So Greg said, just ask them a question. Are you tolerant? Which is what you talked about. And what's the person going to say? No, I'm not. I'm a bigot. I don't think so. They're going to say, well, sure, I'm tolerant. I'm part of the 21st century. We're all tolerant. Then you can say, fine, then I may disagree with you, but you won't have a problem with it because you're tolerant. Where do they go from there? They just got themselves painted in a corner. So I thought that was a nice response. We can ask questions too. Again, I love the use of questions. Greg does that so much in his book. You all have to read Tactics sometime. It's a great read about dealing with the secular world when they come in and they throw questions at you, things we can say. So what about this? We don't have to argue about this tolerance thing. Why don't we just ask questions? Well, if all religions are as valuable as all others, which is the word, right? It's the 21st century, they're all the same. Really, do you honor cannibalism, headhunting, sati? Remember what that was? In India, they would a man would die and they would put the widow on the funeral pyre.
Oh, she would die.
And the British said, I don't think so. And they put an end to it. But it was a religious practice. Really? Is that as equal as all these other things? How about female genital mutilation? You okay with that? And I think, at this point, people are going to get a little uncomfortable. It's kind of hard to say, really? I'm not sure I really believe all those things are fine and dandy. How about this one? Do you value Christianity and Hinduism equally? Two religions? Considering Hinduism disregards the untouchables. Christianity spent 2,000 years taking care of the poor and taking care of the defenseless, taking care of the powerless. Compare that to Hinduism. They step over the people that have problems there. That's why Mother Teresa and all these others came and did what they did. Calcutta was just a pretty dark place. Nobody cared because that's karma. Don't mess with their karma. They're paying off debts from some other life. So we're talking religious differences there. It's a huge religious difference. I don't see those as equal. How about more questions? Let's push it. This is a good way to get your argument. Push it as far until people really get uncomfortable. Really? If all values and beliefs are equally worthy of respect, are you including the Nazis in this? Joseph Stalin? Child sacrifice? Boko Haram? How about ISIS? They just have a different perspective? Are you going to be as tolerant for all of these? At that point, probably a lot of uncomfort there. It's like, no, I don't think so. What about this? Here's something else we can do. We can say, what do you feel about racism? And they'll say, I'm against it. Oh, so you don't tolerate that? No. What about environmentalism? Is it okay if I go out and take a big old can of poison up here at Lake Dixon and dump it in and see how many fish float to the surface because I'm bored? And they say, no, that's terrible. Oh, you're not tolerant of that, I guess. So what are we talking about here? It's okay to be intolerant. There's good things to tolerate. There are good things to tolerate, and there are things that we shouldn't tolerate. All of us shouldn't tolerate certain things. So now it's just a difference of what are we not tolerating. It's not a question of I'm tolerant, you're intolerant. We're all intolerant for certain things, and we ought to be. So I think that's a nice comeback. Here's another thing we can think about. We've got a terrific ally. People really do like Jesus. They don't like Christianity in particular, and maybe don't like us, but they like Jesus. So we can always take Jesus and bring him alongside of us. So maybe they ask us a question, really, you against same-sex marriage? That doesn't sound very tolerant. And we can say, well, my view on marriage is the same as Jesus' view. One man, one woman for a lifetime. We're not out there proclaiming things that Jesus didn't proclaim, for heaven's sakes. So it's a good ally to have on our side. Of course, apologetics, you knew somewhere along the line I was going to push that. I think that's a good response in this age of tolerance to think about what apologetics can do. So we're going to have a new series starting in January. New stuff, new material. It's so new, Steve and I don't know about it. We don't know what we're going to, but it's going to be different. So if this is your first time through this class, it's not like we do the same thing over and over again. So we've done 8 years, we've had DVDs, books, all sorts of things, but we'll try to make it important to you so you can go out in the world during the week and make a difference instead of just learning things. We want you to go ahead and make it practical as well. And we need to look at the weakness and think about the weakness of this new tolerance. It really avoids serious engagement with moral issues, doesn't it? Because it's a real quick way out. Oh, you believe X and I believe Y. I don't want to think about your X. We'll just walk away from it. Let's just agree to disagree. Really? These are important issues. And it's just a real cheesy way to get past things. It reinforces a lazy mind. I don't need to investigate it. I don't need to find truth. I just need to know you're different than me. Isn't that wonderful? It refuses to see evil. How can there be evil if all these views are the same? That's why I think a question about ISIS and Boko Haram, is that okay for them to take those girls out against their will and make them the wives or the slaves? Who's going to think that's okay? Anyway. And of course what happens is that view tends to, it's kind of ironic, isn't it? They don't think there's evil except for you. And what you're doing is evil because you're not tolerant. It trivializes religious differences, doesn't it? Oh, they're all the same. Islam and Christianity, oh, they're worshiping the same God. No, not really. That's a real put down on religions, isn't it? To say, oh, they're all about the same. Well, they aren't. They have huge differences. Some say you die and you get reincarnated. Some say you die and something else happens to you. You can't hook those together. They're huge differences about how you came in this world and what you're supposed to do while you're here and what happens to you in the afterlife. How about this next one? It weakens democracy, doesn't it? Isn't that the point of democracy? To talk these things out and decide this is the way we ought to go and this is the way we shouldn't go, and let's find some studies and let's see what the different states are doing and make these kinds of decisions. And instead, I think we're seeing this with the current election. I don't want to step in it too deeply here, but it's all emotions and it's all feelings. And you watch those, I don't care who they are, they'll run these little 30-second ads. They're all emotional ads. Somebody will have a coat over his or her shoulder, off to work, and I'm working for you, and it's here's my wonderful family, and don't I look nice, and here's a nice cliche. I like Ronald Reagan, but when he ran for re-election, it was morning again in America. What'd that mean? I don't know. It was just a nice feel-good kind of thing. And then the martial music plays, and everybody dances along and goes and votes for that person. So, we're kind of losing the whole idea of the seriousness of democracy, to talk these things out. Back in the 1850s, Lincoln and Douglas would go to these towns and debate. Each of them wanted to be the senator from Illinois. These debates lasted like 2 hours, and the crowds would come, and these guys didn't tap dance at all. They got into serious, difficult issues. And you look at our founding fathers. You had Hamilton and Jay and Madison writing the Federalist Papers. Were they fun and games? No, they're pretty deep things to read about. And we've come to such frivolous ends, and part of it is nobody wants to think about the big issues. We don't want to decide, let's just let it go. Darren?
I'm in fear of our next generation coming out of these universities because, these terms now, they use trigger words, microaggressions, safe zones.
Yeah, it's like this.
Right. That, you talk about weakening democracy, that is just the core of it right there. It's going to happen. We are not going to have, our country's not going to be the same in the next 20 to 40 years.
No, it isn't. How about a couple more weaknesses here of this tolerance? The tyranny of the individual. What do I mean by that? Remember that lady with the frog ornaments? The principal says, one person didn't like it. You should get rid of it. That one person may be a nutcase.
Yeah.
Why are we, one person says, I don't like this. Okay, so everybody's got to change. What kind of deal is that? Why are we doing that? Because those odd crank positions are never going to end. They'll find out, oh, all it took is one person and we got rid of this. So somebody can come up with a new issue that he or she is unhappy with, and we're going to have to change that. It's going to be a constant changing of things, and the vast 99.9% of the population has got to go along with these odd deals. And we're going to lose some human rights, extremism.
California voted for the one man, one woman marriage law, and one judge turned it over.
Yeah.
I mean, that's ridiculous.
Yeah, if it's not tyranny from the individual out in society, then it's a judicial tyranny. Yeah, that's a good point. I love this quotation. I hope some of you read Chesterton. He's an amazing person. If you don't want to read books of his, just type in quotations by G.K. Chesterton. He was a Christian right around the turn of the century, 1900. There's a story about him. I never found out if it's true or not. I hope it's true. That newspapers in 1900, as they were looking forward to the next 100 years, they asked some of the leading thinkers, what's wrong with the world? In other words, what can we work on? And so they would get these responses. Education needs to improve, the conditions for the working man. And so the question was, what's wrong with the world? And Chesterton sent in a two-word reply, I am. Isn't that good? That's a Christian response, isn't it? What's wrong with the world? We all are wrong with the world. You're not going to change the world by a new school system, a new place for the common work. I love that. I hope it's true. Anyway, here's what he had to say about tolerance. Tolerance is the virtue of a man without convictions. Isn't that a good comment? I don't want to think about it. I don't even know what I think about it. So I just appreciate you having that position. Wow. This is not a good way to go. Okay, I'll tell you what, I had some other things. I am going to go faster. You may get the blind men and the elephant illustration. Oh, let's all be tolerant. Just like these blind guys were groping the elephant different places, saying, oh, the elephant's like a pillar. Oh, no, he's like a rope. You're crazy. Oh, he's a snake. And then the Raja comes out, and they're blind, remember, and the Raja comes out and says, you all have a piece of the truth. You're all correct. You're all okay. And do you hear the message there? That's what religions are doing. They all have a different picture of God because we're all blind. Anybody see a problem with that as an illustration?
You know, it means absolute truth doesn't exist, or is.
That's right. That's the point of it.
Mm-hmm.
But is there a problem with that?
Yeah, it implies that the person who says that you're all right has some kind of higher moral understanding than you do.
So the person that's telling you is the Raja, who has sight. How'd that person get sight? And all the rest of us are blind.
Right.
How'd that happen? That's a pretty arrogant position. I have it okay, but the rest of the human race is all screwed up. And there's another illustration like that, or another little story like that you probably have seen. All roads lead to God. So see that road snaking up there? That's the Christian road. But if you could see on the other side, get in the helicopter, and if you could see from the other side, there's Buddhists going up another road, there's Hindus going up another road, the Jehovah's Witnesses are going up another road. And so you get that illustration that, come on, we're all going to the same place. It's all going to end up at the same spot. Well, that's exactly what Carrie said before. Who gets to be in the helicopter? We're all trudging up these roads and we can't see each other, but somebody has gotten up high enough to say, oh, it's all the same. It's that same arrogant God's eye view again. How'd that person get that? And the rest of us don't get to be in the helicopter.
Enlightened.
Yeah, they're enlightened. So it's pretty arrogant. Don't worry about these illustrations if you ever come across them. I'll tell you, I'll just send these to you if you want, just let me know. But we can do some things like showing the moral blindness, practicing civility. We don't want to get on the level of throwing dirt and all. Looking at the inconsistencies, that we've talked about that some tonight, the arrogance that's in that view. And we can change the world. Look what the Christians did, the early Christians. A handful changed an entire secular society. The Roman society flipped it upside down by 300 AD. Constantine says, I'm going to get on the side of the Christians. And so he becomes a Christian himself. A complete change of the society. Frankly, I think we ought to be prepared to suffer. It's starting to happen. And we've had it good for a long, long time in this society. And others around the world suffer, and we say, oh, we feel so bad for them. Well, sometimes that shakes out people's faith pretty well. Find out who the real Christians are. And most importantly, trusting God, obviously. By the way, this thing about tolerance, that you religious people are causing all the problems of the world. What's caused most of the deaths in battles and wars? Christians and religious people?
Atheists.
It's the atheism. Mao and Hitler and Stalin. Boy, there's the big three right there. Probably over 100 million. Pol Pot. He just didn't have a chance to run a big country, but he took pretty good care of Cambodia, didn't he? What did he kill? Like a fourth or third of the population? It was huge. Drove them all out into the country and they just died. That's what you get when you, it's not the religious people that are causing the deaths around the world in wars. Resources, again, I can send that to you.
Okay. I just wanted one thing though, I mean, people always keep thinking of the Crusades.
I was just thinking
You
the
know,
same.
Yeah, they got to go back
come
1,000 years
Yeah,
to,
they go back 1,000 years to one, you know, segment of battle.
Yeah.
And in one era, and then it's, you know.
which
all
was a
the-
defensive
That's-
war by
that's
Christians. It was a
exactly right.
defensive war.
That's right.
That's what our president today was telling us 4, 5, 6 months ago. Why should we judge those people when we had the Crusades?
Yeah, I remember him saying that.
The other is the Spanish Inquisition, right?
Yeah.
You know,
I've got to talk on that sometime. I have one already. The Spanish Inquisition didn't kill anywhere near well, this is getting off on a whole nother thing, but yeah, so they'll drag up these things from hundreds and hundreds of years ago. We don't have to go too far back to find out what the atheists have been up to.
Yeah.
If you don't have any responsibility to God, then you can break all the eggs you want to. That's what Stalin said. Well, to make an omelet, you got to break a few eggs. That was his idea for taking out millions of people. To him, it's just making an omelet. A pretty chilling way of looking at the human race. And then I put a little note at the bottom, our best resource. Let me end on this. Let's have something positive here at the end. These things I have spoken to you so that in me you may have peace. In the world you have tribulation, but take courage. I have overcome the world. It already has happened. Satan's fighting a rearguard action at this time. It's okay. And I know I have to hear that every once in a while because I get kind of discouraged looking at the newspaper headlines. But Jesus has overcome the world, so that's the good news.